So thank you, everybody, for coming today. My name is Amanda Lyons. I'm the Executive Director of the Human Rights Center here at the law school. And the conversation that we have today has really been a long time coming. And for us, it's really a treat to be organizing this panel together with our partners and friends at the Binger Center for New Americans here at the law school and with ORAM. Today is Trans Day of Remembrance, and so before we go any further, we're just going to take a few minutes in silence and just ask you to reflect on that day and what it means. Thank you. So today we're really fortunate to have this space to think about and talk about and hear expertise and experience on the question of the barriers that LGBTQ migrants, asylum seekers, refugees are facing. And we definitely have a lot of expertise in the room, and there'll be space also to take questions from all of you. So I will not take up much time. But I am going to take a little license for just a short reflection. This event has taken on another level of meaning for me in these weeks. We lost a friend passed away last month, Jonathan Eloff, who I know was a friend to others in the room and a graduate of our law school. So it was a big loss for us. And he had been doing work in the most recent years of his career in Latin America, but his career as a lawyer after he left the law school was really focused in the field of immigration and working on the human rights of non-citizens in this country. And he was especially focused on the rights of LGBTQ individuals. And that was at a time that there was much less visibility and attention paid to that population. And so I'm remembering him really fondly and glad to have this conversation also in his honor. And I wanted to share just one small quote that I found in some of the papers that we have at the Human Rights Center. He had been a fellow with our center and had written a reflection on his work and kind of concluded it with these words that I think set the tone for us today. In terms of advice that he had for other advocates, he said, "Be patient, perseverant, and steadfast. Have hope and be always open to learning along the way." So today I am grateful to all our experts that are visiting to help us learn along the way and all of you for joining us. I'm going to turn the microphone over now to Sarah Brennis, who is a great friend, a great lawyer, a great advocate, the director of the Binger Center here for New Americans, and for many years, I won't guess how many, maybe 14 years before coming to the university, directed the Refugee and Immigrant Rights Program at the Advocates for Human Rights. So if you can join me in welcoming Sarah to the microphone.
Great, thank you so much, Amanda, and it's a pleasure to be here today and really thrilled to have a whole panel of folks to talk about how refugees and asylees, and particularly those who are seeking protection based on their LGBTQ status, mostly here in the United States and globally, really have a discussion about that. I'm going to provide some legal context to our discussion, and then we'll have a good discussion with the panelists and open it up to all of you. Before I do, I'm going to introduce everyone who we have here on the panel. We have Annie Nolte-Henning, who is the Executive Director at Community Sponsorship Hub. Annie's been a member of the CSH's team, serving as the interim executive director and shaping their strategy, programs, and partnerships since March of 2023. And over the past decade, Annie's launched and operationalized refugee programs across the globe and led teams across the Americas focused on community sponsorship, protection, health, and community building. And she has a background in global human resources, operations, and private sponsorship implementation. And most recently was the director of the Americas at Alight, a global humanitarian agency co-creating solutions with displaced people, and some of her experiences she'll share with us today. And then to her right is Juan Cordero. Juan is a gay asylum seeker originally from Venezuela, and for over a decade, Juan was the editor of an LGBTQ online news magazine in Venezuela. He arrived in the US in 2018 after fleeing political persecution, and is currently an office manager with the Family Partnership an organization that provides services for families and individuals to build better futures here in Minneapolis. And to Juan's right, we have Steve Roth, who is the executive director of ARAM. And he has 2 decades of experience working in both private and nonprofit sectors, where he has long focused on advocating for marginalized communities, both in the United States and around the world. A global-oriented strategic thinker and connector, he leads the organization's strategic development in conjunction with its board of directors, director of programmatic work, development, communications, and oversees operations and partner relations. Previously, Steve served as a senior director of global initiatives at Out and Equal Workplace Advocates, where he led the organization's efforts to advance LGBTIQ workplace inclusion globally, and prior to that served as the founding director of Alturdi, an innovative nonprofit whose mission is to educate and engage Americans on global LGBTIQ issues. And in 2008, he founded Outthink Partners, a boutique communications marketing and advocacy organization specializing in the LGBTIQ market. And then finally, we have O'Shane Brown. O'Shane is a senior in the Hubbard School of Journalism here at the University of Minnesota, majoring in strategic communication. He also works as a server to help pay for his tuition. And O'Shane is originally from Jamaica and moved to the United States in 2011. He received asylum in 2013 and became a U.S. citizen in November of 2020. So. All right. Okay, so my job is to provide the legal context here for our discussion. If one of these will work, I did test. Oh, that's why. There we go. All right, so before we really dive into the focus of our discussion on the legal and societal barriers for LGBTIQ plus asylum seekers and migrants, I just want to provide a little context. I know, looming over us is significant changes for the LGBTI community throughout the United States with a new administration, but I want to provide a little context that gives us sort of where we've come, and then I'll talk a little bit about how refugee law and asylum fits into that and how it's evolved over time, particularly for the LGBTIQ community. I'm not going to dive into all of these as they're up there, but really sort of in initial parts of immigration law, we had laws that really sought to create stereotypes for the LGBTI community. And one of the first laws in the late 1800s stereotypes Chinese migrants as sexual predators. And then in 1917, it was really part of the Immigration and Nationality Act that identified, really sort of used a moral standard and identified the LGBTI community as constitutional psychopathic inferiors in our law. And it wasn't until, and then in the mid-20th century, there were additional really specifications that targeted based on that really sort of mental health status. And then there was a specific ban on sexual deviation that came that was really what was used as a thrust to categorize the LGBTQ migrants generally. And in there, I'll talk about the refugee law that was passed. But even after that, while we had refugee laws here in the United States, Ronald Reagan instituted a ban on HIV/AIDS, which had a disproportionate effect on members of the LGBT community. And while we had a law in 1990 that eliminated bars to entry based on psychopathic personality and sexual deviance, we were one of the last Western countries to really remove that from our immigration laws, and it took another 20 years to repeal the ban, the HIV ban that was put into place years earlier. And just a little more context in terms of our refugee law and the roots of our refugee law really came out of the 1951 Refugee Convention, which was a response to World War II. And then in 1967, there was the convention relating to the status of refugees that was really aimed to go beyond and look at future protection for refugees. And then in 1980, President Carter signed, really sort of codified into US law, the Refugee Convention, and created policies and procedures in order to process refugees, identify them, and also create our domestic asylum process for individuals who arrive here and seek asylum and really essentially seeking to be identified as refugees. I'm going to skip back to that one because I just want to talk a little bit about procedure, because I know, sometimes refugees and asylum seekers are pulled together, and just want to identify a little bit of the distinctions. I know we have two folks here who have gone through the asylum process. I think the person in the next panel arrived as a refugee, and just setting up a few of the distinctions that I really think color additional barriers that people face when they are arriving in the United States and having really sort of the compounded impact of having to navigate the legal process when they're here. First off, one of the major differences is the admission process. For refugees, there is a cap on refugees that is set by the president, in theory, in consultation with Congress. For the last few years, that cap has been at 125,000, which is really sort of one of the higher rates we've had in a long time. It barreled out and likely will again under the next administration. There used to be a cap on the number of asylum seekers who could be granted asylum, but currently there is no cap. So as many people as qualify for asylum are able to receive that protection here in the United States. And then another distinction is the travel. Refugees that are resettled in the United States are identified outside of their country of origin, but usually in another third country. And then the UNHCR provides assistance to help travel here in the United States, and that travel assistance often also extends when people might be reunited with family later. On the other hand, asylum seekers need to find their own way to the United States. There's another slide where I'll explain that might be arriving at the border, but it might be coming on a student visa or a visitor visa, or entering without inspection at all. And if you're here in the United States, you can affirmatively seek asylum, or if you are apprehended by the Immigration Service, that is a defense to your removal or deportation from the United States. And then in the context of refugees, the legal process, they're screened, they're identified to see if they qualify as refugees outside of the US. Where again, for asylum seekers, that happens when someone is in the United States. There is no right to legal counsel in that process. Many people go through the process on their own, and it is up to them to find either free legal services or hire someone who can assist them navigating the legal parameters. And then another important distinction is work. Refugees arrive and they are eligible to work incident to their status when they arrive in the United States, and often connected with resources with our resettlement agencies in order to connect them with benefits and with some assistance with housing and with finding work. For asylum seekers under current law, once someone's filed their asylum application, there's an expectation that you file within a year after you arrive, and then after 6 months after you've applied, you can receive work authorization. But during that time, there is no access to federal public benefits. Some states and local governments do offer some assistance, but from the federal government, you're not eligible until you've actually been granted, which could take anywhere from 6 months to more than a decade. This is one of my favorite infographics that helps sort of plant out the different ways people arrive. As I alluded to earlier, that blue on the top is refugee resettlement. Folks that come into the United States have already gone through the legal process. And then the other three are three different ways that asylum seekers might arrive or might seek asylum. Again, if you entered on a visa or you're just present here in the United States, you can apply affirmatively. And basically, you'd have potentially 2 bites at the apple if you apply with the immigration office and are not granted and are no longer in a status. Then you would be referred to the immigration judge and would have a de novo, a new review of your claim. And then the other 2 categories at the bottom are for individuals who are arriving at the border, may be encountered or might present themselves to border officials and request protection. They would go through a shorter, what's called a credible fear screening, and then present their claim to an immigration judge. And then those who might be in the United States and perhaps they overstayed their status or they never had any status at all, and if they're apprehended by immigration, then they would be placed before the immigration court to present their claim there. Let's see, I just wanted to go back. So I just wanted to, the refugee definition in asylum law is probably one of the more complex areas of immigration law, has a really deep well of case law, but essentially there's 5 elements to it. The individual has to be outside of their country of nationality or their last habitual residence. And then they have to have, so that might be in a third country in the United States where it might be. And then they have to have a well-founded fear of persecution. And generally that's a life-threatening fear of harm. And that according to case law, the well-founded fear is a 10% chance that you would experience that harm, which seems statistically fairly low. But when you're having to prove your claim, it feels quite higher than that. And then that harm has to be connected. There has to be a nexus. It has to be an account on someone's race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group, what we call the protected grounds. Fourth, they have to show that the government is unable or unwilling to protect them. So that may be because the government is the one who's harmed them or threatening to harm them, or it's someone that the government can't or won't control, a private actor who the government either refuses to protect them or they're really incapable of protecting them from that harm. And then finally, they have to establish that they cannot internally relocate, so find somewhere else safe in that particular country. And that goes beyond the fear of harm that they might have. It will also include other socioeconomic considerations, size of the country, and things like that. And then again, if the government is the one who's the persecutor, then it's presumed there was nowhere that they could go because the government is everywhere. All right, so in terms of LGBTIQ claims, usually the protected class, as you saw, there's 5 protected classes. They might be variations thereof, but in most cases, it's the particular social group that someone has to establish that they're a member of. And so under case law, they have to establish that that characteristic is immutable. They cannot or should not be required to change it. It's particular. There are people who are in the group and outside of the group within the context of the country, and it's socially distinct. It's recognizable. Not that you'd necessarily be recognized on the street, but that in society, this group is considered a particular social group. And then in these types of claims, some of the common claims that people bring for qualifying as a refugee or asylum might include persecution based on physical violence, so assault and rape is fairly common, psychological abuse, harassment, forced therapy, and legal discrimination. On its own, discrimination isn't sufficient for a claim, but compounded with these other characteristics, we often see criminalization of same-sex relationships that might be the basis of someone's claim as well. And then some of the common special considerations that we see in LGBTIQ plus cases, really common to see private actor claims, people who fear their family perhaps, and sometimes that's because they suffered harm when they're in their country of origin. But it also might be something that happened. Maybe they came out when they were here in the United States and then were experiencing threats by family members who wouldn't accept them and might harm them if they return. A lot of state-sponsored violence in the number of countries that criminalize based on sexual orientation or gender orientation. And then I think another really important thing is the cumulative past harm. Sometimes we can point to a very specific incident of harm that rises to the level of persecution, but for many people, it's a lifetime of harm that they experienced since they were young. And really, I think that can be one of the challenges for a lot of these claims because there's a lot of harm that people may have suppressed for survival and really in the asylum system having to really bring those incidents out in order to make a claim that there's a cumulative past harm. And then refugees that become refugees once they're here in the United States, and people might be coming out while they're here in the US and that's triggering harms, or maybe there's a change in government policies that makes it dangerous for them to return. I won't go through all these cases, but there are a number of cases that really kind of saw the evolution of claims based on LGBTIQ status. One of the first time that the U.S. acknowledged persecution on the basis of sexual orientation was in 1990. And then we saw some other cases. There was another one in 2000 that recognized female sexual identity was immutable and inherent, and I found that to qualify. And even though it incorrectly identified the applicant as a gay man, it really paved the way for transgender claims in our jurisprudence. And then there's other cases that highlight some of the other types of abuses that people go through. And I think what's really important, in some cultures, there's different therapies or ways that try to suggest that people can change their identities. And even though family members might think they're well-intended, it really doesn't matter. If the person interprets the harm that they experience as harm, that can count as persecution. And then there have been several cases that recognize private actors. And then one of the other challenges that we've seen in a number of cases is really how judges and how people might determine people's credibility because of the way that they present themselves in cases. And sometimes that can be a big hurdle when we're presenting cases based on LGBTIQ status. Just a couple of the challenges, particularly for asylum seekers in the United States, the backlogs and delays. The policies and the ways that claims are adjudicated is based on whoever is heading up the administration at the time, and that changes. So sometimes people might apply for asylum, and then there's a different category of cases that becomes priority, and so that can really create a backlog. And that's not to mention the extensive backlogs we have in immigration court. Both the asylum office and the courts have significant backlogs, so the wait is very long and really having to stay in limbo and have to be prepared to present your claim years and years after you've fled your country of origin. Detention practices, particularly for people who are arriving at the border, are disproportionately impact LGBTIQ asylum seekers. The proof of persecution can be a challenge. The burden of proof is on the applicant to establish that they meet all of those 5 elements. And that can be a real challenge to find people who are willing to speak on your behalf, provide affidavits, have enough evidence to support the fear that you have to return, and either that the government might harm you or wouldn't otherwise protect you. And then again, credibility determinations are often a challenge in immigration court, and how judges are assuming people should act one way or another if they have a claim based on their LGBTIQ status. And then there's significant challenges, particularly for transgender people in detention, and the ways in which people are treated or categorized and put in different facilities while they might be in immigration detention if they arrived at the border. And then finally, challenges for LGBTIQ refugees and asylees generally. There's a trauma history that people have to navigate through. And again, trying to navigate the trauma that you've survived and then have to retell it to a government official really is a challenge, and can be a prolonged one, particularly with the extensive backlogs. And then the compound vulnerability of within the United States and extensive challenges for the LGBTI community in general, and then being a migrant. And oftentimes, I would say, many of the clients that I've worked with are significantly underemployed. A lot of asylum seekers who have claims based on LGBTIQ status have advanced degrees, had professional careers. We'll talk with some of them, and that's one of the really big challenges, because it takes a long time to be able to reestablish or get recertified, and so that can compound challenges. And then I think also being ostracized from the country of origin. We had a gathering several years ago when we talked about just how important it is to do things like share meals from a country of origin, and that's something that a lot of our refugee and asylee communities are able to share with people from their country of origin, but oftentimes those that are seeking protection based on their LGBTIQ status are isolated from the people from their country of origin, and so it adds a really an additional hurdle of being further isolated as you're trying to navigate the United States and not being able to rely on those things that are familiar. And then finally, the political climate, which I don't need to go into any further, that can really color one's experience here. And all that is to say that it's really important to be an ally in welcoming refugees to the United States, and we have a panel of those who have lived experience and serve as allies to individuals who are here in the United States and seeking protection. So I'd like to turn it over to some questions for our panel here. And I'm gonna start with O'Shane. And O'Shane, can you just tell us a little bit, as I kind of went through, it's a very complicated process to find out even where and how to apply for asylum. Can you talk a little bit about how you first learned about the asylum process when you came to the United States?
Okay, hello everybody, O'Shane. In 2011, I initially came here on a J1 student work visa, and I was up in Grand Portage working for a year. And as it was drawing closer to my leaving date to go back to Jamaica, I was having a conversation with one of my friends who's also Jamaican, and just telling her about all the things that I've experienced there and how I was scared to go back, being that I came here and got a taste of freedom and being able to express myself how I truly felt. And she mentioned asylum, and I'm like, asylum? Because the only definition that I knew for asylum at the time was like the insane asylum kind of thing. And so she told me, she explained to me like, no, you can apply for it, and they'll have you, if you get it, you can live here. And I'm like, oh, tell me more. And she found out about it because she had a brother in New York that did it. And so I went and did my research and found out that there were two organizations. There was one in North Dakota, I think. I don't remember the name of it. But then there was the Advocate for Human Rights here in Minneapolis. And I reached out and set up a telephone interview. And from there, I came down from Grand Portage, met up with, I think Deepender was the lawyer at the time. Mm-hmm. And they took my case, and that was it. And I met you from there, and I'm here.
Make it sound like it was very, very easy, but yeah. I know there's more layers to that, so we'll circle back. Oh, yes. Juan, can you tell us a little bit about your experience applying and how that may contrast with yours?
Oh, hi. Actually, while you were reading all that, my skin started to oh my gosh, yes, I know this. It is a hard decision first, because when you face asylum, you renounce to some of your identity in your country, your family, your friends. So I was lucky to make this decision with my partner, which we were together for 7 years. So we sat down and said, well, this is the situation. And, I would take in this big step to be a part of our culture, of families, and everything that we know. And definitely our lives were worth it to just say, yes, we need to do this. But the process itself was very difficult because, like you said, you need to gather all this information. First of all, you don't even know where to start. So I went, knowing the repercussions of asylum, I was like, I want to look for some other options. So I went and looked for legal advice, and they were basically saying, if you're not a genius, you have nothing to do but seek for asylum. And I'm like, I'm not a genius, so so I was like, okay, this is my option. So I started to build little by little by myself my case first, and then I found another Venezuelan friend who lives in Denver, and she like told me, you know, I helped some other people to build their case. I can guide you through. So that's we start little by little, but yeah, I mean, all the things that you mentioned, it's just multiplied by 10. It's really uphill.
Yeah. Yep. And turning to you, Steve, what do you think the U.S. what role do you think the U.S. plays in providing refuge to vulnerable populations like the LGBTIQ plus individuals?
Sure, thank you for that, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So first of all, as the country that has on the Statue of Liberty and our mantra, give us your tired, your weary, those yearning to be free. It's we have kind of a moral obligation, but beyond that, if you think you mentioned, Sarah, that the current refugee cap is 125,000, and that may sound like a big number, but that's out of a population of 330 million. And when you think that countries much smaller than ours have taken a lot, much higher numbers. Canada, which is a fraction of the population of the U.S., which has a much more open refugee and asylum policy, or Germany, which took in 1 million primarily Syrian and Afghan refugees, in a country of around 80 million. So there's just, our capacity to do that as a country, not only, our commitment to the 1967 convention that you mentioned, that we process that we signed, as well as our refugee laws. And the fact is, really under the last two administrations, starting under COVID, when the Trump administration closed the border, and under Title 41, and really illegally, stopped the ability for people to seek asylum in this country, which is a legal right, and that the Biden administration has continued in a lot of ways. And of course, like you said, we're preparing now for a change of administration. So there's more to come. So there are kind of those kind of factual elements. But then beyond that, I can talk about our work just a little bit. Working as ORAM, we work in transit countries. So after someone has left their country of origin, but before they've reached a resettlement country like the U.S. And the truth is, what we see over and over is that the U.S. is this great beacon of hope for people that are seeking asylum and seeking refuge. And we have, even with the change of administration, everything that's happening in this country right now, we have LGBT refugees we work with on the ground in Kenya, that the U.S. is still their top choice or goal for country of asylum. And we've seen other programs. We work with a partner organization in Mexico, for example, that had created a program. Argentina is another country that has a very welcoming and open refugee policy, and so they were giving primarily transgender refugees who were coming from extreme violence in Central America the opportunity to relocate to Argentina with a path towards to residency, whatever, and not a single person took it because they were all more interested in coming to the U.S. just because of what the U.S. offers, and the hope that both O'Shane and Juan talked a little bit about here.
So Annie, as we've noted, sort of the federal policy and how people are, how the federal government views and receives asylum seekers and refugees varies, but oftentimes it's those grassroots and people that are doing programming and supporting folks, regardless of what the current state of the law and policies are. Are there specific programs or initiatives that you found particularly helpful?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks everyone for being here. Like you heard from Steve, I mean, America is known as the most welcoming country, and because of our large resettlement program now, that's likely under threat. But we do, beyond refugee resettlement, which at a cap of 125,000, that's a nice number, but it is a small sliver. This year, we were able to welcome 100,000 of those 125,000. It used to be a cap. I think under the Biden administration, it was looked at as a goal, and so 100,000 feels good. But we also, as we just saw, there's significant backlog. My organization runs the program, the Welcome Corps, in partnership with the Department of State and then dozens and dozens of organizations that are doing the work to recruit sponsors, including our friends at Alight, who are based locally here in Minnesota. And sponsorship has been an incredible way to resettle all refugees, but specifically for LGBT refugees, knowing that you really, that LGBT refugees have been doubly and triply marginalized, and the needs that they are going to have when they are resettled here are going to be specialized and could be in addition to other classes of people. And so through the Welcome Corps, we work with organizations that find queer affirming sponsors that are able then to welcome refugees and ensure that they're getting the specialized care that they might need, and really be able to integrate totally into the community and feel not just like safe, but actually welcomed. Which, those are two very different things. I know survival and safety are really, really important, but like dignity and community are also feel super important as well. This is the refugee admissions program under the Biden administration has really prioritized the resettlement of LGBTIQ refugees. We know that it is an uphill battle. We are lucky to have organizations like ORAM, and we're going to need organizations like ORAM advocating for us in the next administration. You will hear me make many plugs, but sponsorship looks like groups of 5 private citizens who stand up and say, we are willing to do the work that our American federal government has been doing to do things like find housing, help access healthcare, find employment, get kids enrolled in schools, and just really ensuring that refugees have a safe landing, and that's even more important for LGBT refugees.
Great, thank you, Annie. O'Shane, can you talk a little bit about resources that you found that helped you navigate your process
To be
here?
honest, the Advocate for Human Rights did a really solid job in kind of like giving me some resources that I could look into. However, there wasn't a lot that, as you mentioned earlier, that the government did. I was very fortunate that when I did apply for asylum, I'd already worked 11 months up until that point. So I had some savings, and that's basically what I had to live off for, I think, 6 months before I got the asylum. Yeah, there wasn't any particular resources that I was able to tap into from the government. So that's.
And are there any other barriers that you'd want to identify? I mean, particularly as an asylum seeker, not having access to those benefits, or a Welcome Corps, you had to kind of create your own. And how did you navigate that? How did you find support beyond your legal case, but just sort of navigating life here in the U.S.?
For me, I was lucky again because I met, when I was working in Grand Portage, I became friends with a lady who she was friends with a couple that lived down here. And so I was able to stay with them for a week, and through them, their daughter knew the people who became my landlord, and I was able to rent from them. However, before being able to rent from them, I was looking for a place to rent, and because I didn't have any rental history and I didn't have a job at the time, I was getting turned down by everybody that I would reach out to. I remember telling one of the guys, one of the potential landlords, that I had the cash to pay him for the 6 months up front. And he told me straight up no. So I was very fortunate, but I think if there could be any sort of help, I think it would definitely be in housing, and because that's the most important thing, right? Like once you have that figured out, then you can try to figure the rest of it out. But the biggest barrier for me was finding somewhere to live because I didn't have a history of renting, and even though I explained my situation, they weren't receptive to that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's very true. Kind of a catch-22, right?
yeah.
Juan, can you talk a little bit about any particular barriers that you faced or really exceptional resources that you found so far?
Well, I have to say that I appreciate so much the Hennepin County Clinic. I think we have each other as a community. So, for example, I'm talking about like gay community, sometimes it's just, we're only 10% of the population, but also, when the 10% get together, you find places and you find resources. So through somebody that I met randomly on Grindr told me, hey, at my other intersection, I'm HIV positive. So I was like, that was my first concern. Like, how am I gonna get these meds? Because they're extremely expensive. So I was just looking for kind of somebody who can guide me to that. And that's how I find the Hennepin County and some of their, social workers. And they told me, oh, you can go this place and ask for help. Or here we have this program, H&H, and you can enroll in. And so I was fortunate to do that. Also, I was fortunate to speak a little English when I came here, and have a house and have a partner that will provide for me. I didn't have to work at the moment. So I totally resonate with that. We are lucky to have these little things, but what if we're not? Like, what if I was not like able to speak English? What if I don't have anybody who can pay the rent for me? What about what if I have a phone to to go to Grindr? So all these are barriers that we face, like economical barriers, cultural barriers. The lack of resources available for like very specific. One of the things that I appreciate from Hennepin County is that the Positive Care Center, you don't feel ashamed to go there and to talk openly about what is going on. So I think we need more of that in general.
Yeah, great. So speaking of building supportive communities, Steve, can you talk a little bit about steps being taken to foster a sense of community in the work that you're doing?
Absolutely, and I'll talk a little bit more from the context of where we do our work, which is transit countries. And you highlighted earlier in your presentation some of the many challenges that LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers face. And one is this unique perspective as a refugee that most refugees and asylum seekers, they flee with their own families, they flee often with their entire communities. But these are usually the people that LGBTQ people are fleeing from. So there's that community, that built-in community is missing. And so people are often traveling alone, and they're facing discrimination across so many different identity lines. So not only their sexual orientation and their gender identity, but their country of origin and the language that they speak, and sometimes the color of their skin. And so it can be really hard to find community. One thing that we see that's amazing, and I think we see this in the LGBTQ community around the world, is that we're great at building community and creating our own chosen families. And so in some of the contexts that we work, Kenya is where we have our biggest country program, and there's some really amazing queer refugee-led safe houses. Sometimes they're organized as what we call CBOs, community-based organizations, or RLOs, refugee-led organizations, and they take care of each other and they look after for each other and they create family. And there's one that we work with in Nairobi called the Nature Network, and they've actually even given themselves names of different family members. Like there's auntie who does a lot of the cooking, and this person is father and mother, and so you see a lot of this created families. And we're really honored to be able to partner with these organizations, whether it's these CBOs or sometimes it's a shelter. And ORAM over the years has been able to earn the trust of these organizations, which is something that that queer refugees tend to lack, because there are so many. They've had that trust violated so many times, whether it's with their own families or through authorities. we did some research in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya a few years ago, and 88%, well, first of all, 93% of the people surveyed had faced some kind of verbal assault based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, and 88% of people had been refused service by the police. So they're not even, they don't even have access to basic services and protection and support. And so, like Annie said earlier, that community aspect is so necessary, and it's so lacking and challenging in countries where there's persecution coming from so many sides. So that is something that we try to build up and support.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And on that note, as we've been talking about, a lot of the process to seek protection really focuses on past trauma, victimhood, and at the same time, there's important work to really help people feel safe and empowered. Are there certain things that you've worked on, Annie, that has really tried to help protect that individual agency and help people as long as they're transitioning in the process to really sort of feel empowered and safe and hopeful?
Yeah, I mean, so listening to O'Shane and Juan, they're living proof at how resilient asylum seekers and refugees are. But I think it all comes down to social capital. And when I think of social capital, it's actually hard because I was born with social capital, because I was born in the United States, right? And so if my car broke down, or I needed a tank of gas, or I needed a moving van, maybe I didn't have it, but I knew a person that knew a person that could help me get it, right? And I think that's what I always think about when it comes to what this community sponsorship means, is that immediately when you arrive, you have a group of 5 people that have your back. It might be 5. I'm in a sponsor group, and there's 10 of us to a family of 4 Afghans, and so and we have this group's back, right? And so listening to Juan and O'Shane talk about this, I'm like, how different it could have been had you had a group of 5 be there for the days where you did need rent, or you needed a phone to get on Grindr, or whatever it was, right? But that social capital then helped O'Shane make sure to get an apartment, right? And so it's that shows the resilience. But I think that that's all really, really important, especially for LGBT refugees, because some of those needs of being able to access the mental health support and the medical care that LGBT refugees are really dealing with, and the trauma that they've faced, it is that much more important to make sure that they are insulated with that level of support that can help better navigate a really complex system that you do not understand if you are not from the United States. And so there's research, really good research out there that shows community sponsorship, that community sponsorship works. Not to harp on our traditional resettlement agencies at all, but that research shows refugees that come through community sponsorship get access to English learning much quicker in the first 90 days, gets enrolled in school, and lands jobs faster than going through traditional resettlement. And so I think that just speaks to we're knowing that when 5 Americans or permanent residents have your back, you are going to get to that resiliency that much faster, while recognizing, especially these 2 guys up here really had a lot on their own. But I think that support just integrates and bubble wraps people's experience that much better.
Great, thank you. And O'Shane, can you talk a little bit about, you've been here now over a decade, right? How has your life changed, and where do you see you going in the future?
Oh, wow. My life is done now. It's completely different from what I imagined it would have been if I was still living in Jamaica. I am, every day I get up, I'm surprised that I'm still living in America, and it's It is, I feel like I am forever grateful and indebted to every single person who has helped me along this journey to be where I am right now. Um, I I've been very blessed, lucky, fortunate, and because I've seen stories and I've heard people, and I still have friends back in Jamaica who is still dealing with the things that I've dealt with when I lived there, and it's just I don't know how to explain it, but I'm just so grateful and yeah, I yeah I and. I have a bright future ahead of me. That's what I see. Um, and yeah, I've been given so much here. I mean, a lot of it I've worked out. Like I've been given so many opportunities, and I've taken the ones that I felt suited what I wanted for myself and for my life. And um, I put a lot of work in, and I continue to work. I'm in school, and I don't like being in school, but you know, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's a necessary step to get to where I want to be for the rest of my life, um, and yeah. So I'm forever grateful, and you know, it's been good so far.
Um,
Lucky.
and I'm also curious,
Hmm.
we talk about allyship and, when I work with clients, I can never say that I know what it's like to be in their shoes and
Yes.
going through this journey. And have you had any opportunities now that you've been here so long to mentor others that might be going through the legal process here? Or, what would you
Yes.
tell people who might be?
Yes. So two of my friends that I went to college with, they came after I did, and they're gay too, and I introduced them to the Advocate for Human Rights, and I was there with them throughout the journey of the whole process, and any questions about like the process itself or housing, and because at that point I'd already made enough connections in the city that I could, oh, I know a person who works at that place that that you could possibly reach out to and get hired, or I know my landlord has a place that he's renting. You should reach out. Here's his number. Reach out, and so on. And then with the thing with the connection to culture, we would meet up maybe once a week, and we would cook and laugh and tell stories and talk about all the gossip and political stuff that's happening in Jamaica. And so that was really good. One of them still lives here in St. Paul. The other one moved to New York a year ago. But we've kept in touch since. So I guess that's a little my giving back to um, people who are going through the same thing that I went through. So
Yeah,
yeah.
great. And Juan, you're still navigating things. How do you envision your life here in the United States, if and when your case is resolved?
Well, I'm married for the second time. So I see a lot of my, um, let's say, my life I see here in the Midwest, in Minneapolis, because I'm married to somebody who is from here. Um, but for me, the experience has been, well, this is another fight, honestly. I fought a lot in my country for democracy, for freedom, for expression, for identity, for a lot of those. And I found myself here in this country fighting for the same things. I think I'm still like, I wake up every morning and I also feel like, oh, this is a new fight today. So sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming and a little bit tiring, but I feel that as a human being, I cannot afford to just say, okay, whatever. So in my journey has been like, now I find out that I'm Latino and I look Latino. So that was the first time in my life that I realized that, you know. And I understand that I have an accent and I understand this and that. and the context of where I'm living. So that is another fight. There is another fire that gets me through. And of course, I see my life here in the U.S. With my beautiful husband, but I'm also not. I don't think I've closed any chapter yet. So I don't know what my life is going in the next 10 years. But I'm gonna be fighting, for sure.
A longer chapter than you probably hope. Ready to turn to the next one, but good you still are fighting. Well, I want to open it up to the audience for questions for the panelists. Oh.
One, two, three. Hi, my name is Dante. He they pronounce. I wanted to ask, what tips would you have for people who are coming as LGBTQI plus individuals to US, and they are almost 100% sure their case will not be accepted for asylum? What other options maybe you would recommend for them? I mean, I'm just asking. I'm a transgender student, immigrant on visa here myself, and I bet my money if I ever came with my case, I'd never get that granted. So I'm just wondering what other like legal options you would have, like ideas for people seeking support like that.
I'll start things off. Obviously, I don't know the details of your case. I would say don't completely rule it out. There are organizations that specifically their whole focus is to support LGBTQ people who are seeking asylum or trying to navigate the asylum system here in the U.S. One that I can recommend is Immigration Equality, which is based in New York, and they do really great work. There are a lot of pro bono attorneys, and it sounds like advocates for human rights here locally does that sort of work. So maybe start there, and they could certainly refer you to possibly other options or avenues. And then something else I would say is just I don't know how committed you are to being in the U.S. specifically. If you're open to other places, I'm not from Minnesota, but I mean Canada is right here to the north. There are different policies in place there, so maybe that's something to consider.
In the back.
Hi, my name's Eric, and I moved here from Washington, D.C. the very week the pandemic was declared. And so it's been a rough 4 years. But in D.C., I volunteered for a support group for LGBTQ asylum seekers, and we helped hundreds of them get their asylum. My impressions here in the Twin Cities are that a lot of the LGBTQ community isn't even aware of these issues for immigrants. When I try to talk about refugees and asylum seekers, folks would immediately think of trans people coming here from Florida or Texas, and it would be a struggle to get them to think about international non-citizens who maybe don't speak English. And we don't have organizations, we don't have a community center, we have very minimal media presence here in the LGBTQ community. So I don't know whether our second session today is going to get into the specifics of providing LGBTQ specific support and maybe welcome core kind of support groups, or whether that's not going to be on the agenda. But I'd be curious to hear your impressions of how aware are LGBTQ people here in general about this phenomena and this, what I think is a crying need. And I think it could be so simple to provide some of that human capital and support that you talked about. But my impression is we're not building enough of that we need to be building.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. We need more. And I think also depend on where you ask. I know a lot of the Latino community who belongs to the LGBTQI plus. They're very aware of the few resources that there is, because it's a reality that they also live. So if you talk for example, with Mexicans, they will describe the process of asylum as a very difficult, because Mexico is a very interesting part of the world because some places is very safe and some places is very dangerous. So, and I'm very sure you should know about that. So, for example, the rate for asylum that for Mexican gay men, for example, I guess it's just almost 0%. Nobody gets approved because they will tell you, oh, just move to Mexico City or to Puerto Vallarta, but then you don't have money to live in those places. So it is a struggle. We need more resources. We need more visibility. But there's community that is talking about this, and then there's organizations that are talking about this, which is, I really appreciate that.
I would also just add, Erica, it's a really great point, and we see that challenge across the country, and that's why we're doing events like this, and it's really to raise awareness. And even my own friends back in Los Angeles, where I live, and who kind of know what I do, and we had an event there this summer, and so many of them came and said, I didn't realize, that being an LGBT refugee was a thing, and then I didn't realize all of the challenges, let alone all the challenges that they face. And so there's really a huge need for us to shine a light on this and bring more attention. I think especially as we're going into this new administration where the challenges are going to be greater and the resources are going to be even more limited, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think maybe because, at least for me, I can speak for myself, I don't lead with, I'm a gay asylee, and so maybe because of that, people just don't know. People know I'm from Jamaica. They know I came here in 2011, but they don't know the process because I just feel like it's never comes up in discussion. And if it does, I absolutely tell them how I was able to stay in America. But maybe that's one of the issues too, that we're not, because we want to kind of assimilate and just be and live our lives like everybody else. We don't want to be defined by, oh, you run across the border kind of thing. And so maybe that's why a lot of people aren't aware. It's just like, I don't want to lead with that or be defined by that. So if nobody asks, I won't volunteer that. Maybe that's why people are not aware, especially in the LGBTQ community here.
Pass here, and then we can go to you next.
I'm really intrigued by this concept of 5 people that have your back. And maybe building on the gentleman's question up there, how could the local gay community start to build those 5 people groups? Because there are lots of refugees that are LGBT coming into the Twin Cities. Would it be through an organization like yours, Annie? I mean, is there a place to go, or is it literally we need to figure this just out from a grassroots level?
I can definitely help you figure that out, and I'm so glad you asked. I did a head count. There's about 45 people in this room, which means that 9 groups could be formed to sponsor refugees. So just going to put that challenge out there to everyone. No, I mean, this is what it's about, right? And when we talk about grassroots movement, I mean, Welcome Corps is this large national program that is named in the spirit of Peace Corps, right? Because we want it to become this groundswell of support that everyone now knows about, so that when you go to community groups, it's a household name. It just started 22 months ago now, and so we are still like building and like really growing the roots. But even though it sits at that national level, we have organizations in every state, and sometimes multiple in every state, that work with sponsor groups to handhold it, right? Because it's like Asylum. I'm not going to compare it to the Asylum process, but similar to some other complex processes. If you've never had to navigate this before, it can be difficult. And so in Minnesota, the lead organization is Alight, which is a partner organization of ORAMs, and they help walk you through the application process, make sure you get everything you need. Like I said, I'm also in a sponsor group, and I lean on the staff at Alight all the time to tell me, where do we go to get them signed up for SNAP benefits, or how do you get work authorization? Because those aren't things that, again, as a Native American, like I didn't have to go through that. And so there's definitely support out there, both locally and then nationally. So we should talk, and you should challenge 4 other people in this room to join a group with you.
And I think I'd also just add to put in a plug for those who also want to support asylum seekers. I remember when the Syrian refugee crisis hit the media. That's usually, when we get a lot of interest. And we had, and I was at the Advocates for Human Rights at the time, and we're usually used to working with volunteer attorneys and having cases. But there were so many people that wanted to figure out how to support. It was a global refugee crisis at the time, and then we had, families and children that were coming in the mid, starting around 2015, and we worked alongside some other organizations and just sort of convened people to talk about, learn about sort of the unique challenges for asylum seekers. And then all of these independent groups decided, well, we're going to focus on collecting diapers, so that our agency always had diapers when these families would come in. Or there was another group that knew how isolated people can be, having to couch hop, not having access to a job, not having access to transportation, and really, wanting to be able to cook foods that were familiar to them. So we had another group that said, well, give us a grocery list and we'll, get groceries for folks. So I think, there's certainly, if there's a group of people that want to come together and say, you know what, we will be a contact if you have an asylum seeker who is LGBTIQ, like put them in touch with us and we'll help them navigate and get connected to resources. Because I think, there are certain structure government and local government supports, and, like Hennepin County is a great resource. But I think just the more people can connect with others to help them navigate things beyond the legal processes, really helps them be able to not have to lead with, I'm an asylum seeker, but I'm just here and trying to, make tomorrow better. So, another mic, yeah.
My name's Jerry. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's off.
Okay, I'm Jerry, and I think this is sort of an interesting vein and what we were talking, the gentleman up there, and I'm just wondering, internationally, like in Canada or in European countries, are there other models to support asylees and refugees that might be something that we could start to think about in the U.S.? I think this 5-person thing is a great thing, but I'm guessing there's some other things out there also.
So I'll start and then I'll hand over to you. The Welcome Corps was fully adapted by our friends in the North. They've been doing this, they're the OGs of this. They've been doing it for 40 years. 1 in 4 Canadians have sponsored. So this is like bread and butter. This is their bread and butter. And we we totally stole it from them and adapted it to work for us. But maybe I'll let you speak to some of the other models that you've seen work in other countries.
Yeah, Canada is definitely a role model for a lot of this work. There are other models, some that don't work as well as others. I actually just was communicating with one of our team members in Berlin. We have an office in Berlin, and we do a lot of work, particularly with LGBTQ Ukrainians who have fled because of the war. We have a big housing program and now an economic empowerment program. But one of the issues is that Germany is the second most popular country after Poland for Ukrainians in Europe. There are nearly 1 million there. And, the vast majority want to be in a big city like Berlin, and Berlin in particular. And so what the German government has done is they created, for anyone that's been to Berlin, the old Tegel airport is now refugee housing. They've built housing on that airport site. And you might think, oh, well, that's good that the German government is at least providing housing, but it's really problematic because the queer refugees in our community face a lot of problems there. It's this idea of being housed with oftentimes people that they're not welcomed by in their home countries. And so there's a huge amount of discrimination and even some violence against them. A lot of them seek external housing via our programs. And so I guess that is to say there are other models for sure, but they don't always work. There are, so I've mentioned before, we work in transit countries. The vast majority of refugees and asylum seekers are in transit countries. Less than 1/2 of refugees get resettled in any given year. So that means 99.5 plus are in these countries in places like Kenya and Mexico and Turkey. And again, different models. Turkey has a model because again, everyone wants to be in Istanbul, and especially if you're a member of the LGBT community, it's one of the few places, like you were saying with Mexico, where you can be relatively safe. But Turkey has a policy of putting people in satellite cities, and you're assigned based on your nationality. And so again, it's a model. It's a different model, but it doesn't work for LGBT people, because then if you're stuck in this rural village or something and you're a trans woman from Syria, that's that's a problem. Kenya has, and as do a lot of refugee companies, an encampment policy. So technically, if you're a refugee, you're supposed to be in a refugee camp. It's back to that same model where most of that violence that LGBT refugees experience there are at the hands of other refugees. And so there are different models. They don't always work so well, though.
Okay, thank you. My name's Perry. I also have a sponsored family. We were maybe one of the first to sponsor an Afghan family that came in. And I will share with you what I think creates the longer term success that I don't hear here as much, but some from the gentleman that came from Washington. And if you look back historically at America, whether it was the Italians that came in, or the Irish that came in, or the Jews that came in, or the in the Twin Cities, the Southeast Asians that came in, the Hmong families and Vietnamese, what you found was the initial group struggled, and they found sponsors, whether it was Lutheran Social Services or if it was HIAS type programs that got a foothold in, but then they reached back and they lifted up their own. And I think what I have not seen with the LGBT community nearly enough is to have them literally come together and say, we've got a foothold in and we're successful and we're thankful for America, as you mentioned. But now, how much energy is being put to create your own sponsorship circles, your own groups to reach back and lift up the next wave that's coming in? And until that happens, you'll always be looked at as waiting for a group to help you out. And there are groups that will be there to help you out, whether it's sponsors like the group we put together, whether it's a Light, which is a coordinator of groups, but not in and of itself, being the sponsor organization for a family. But together you can find other LGBTQ families or groups to put together, get assistance, and then reach back and lift up, rising tide rises all ships kind of a situation. That way you'll have access to resources and you'll build successful strength. And I think that's something we need to start to get together and talk about more. There's experience to look back to that has been very successful. A number of years ago, Mark, I don't remember when we did the I Am a Star program for the Somali community. Incredibly successful. That 2011, yeah. I used to be on the board of Light, so I'm somewhat familiar with it. And I'm on the board of ORAM, so I'm somewhat familiar with that. But there can be tremendous successes that takes place. But with the I Am a Star program, we helped fund and we helped organize that community to help themselves. And when you think about that, in the Twin Cities, we now have a sitting congresswoman. We have a vibrant community of business people that are hiring, their family and friends and other immigrants that are coming in and creating a thriving business group that are successful. And that will generate tremendous success in this country, which right now has a lot of fatigue, and we're going to struggle with the government that's in place right now. But you don't need the government necessarily all by themselves. We can do a lot, and you can do a lot for yourselves.
I think just to speak to that briefly, one of the things, in addition to the Welcome Corps in response to the Afghan evacuees, that Minnesota doubled down and doubled what, and at that time, the resettlement agencies had been gutted, and all of a sudden they were charged with assisting Afghan evacuees, and the state of Minnesota doubled down. And one of the things that they did that was different in trying to learn from what happened with other refugee waves is that they made sure and helped support the Afghan Cultural Society, that's just down the block actually, become established, so that there was that at the beginning, because usually folks are coming and then they're left to themselves to create their center, and it comes almost too late, right? So I think that's one of the things, at least at a government level, that was changed. I think one of the challenges I think with the LGBTI community is oftentimes it's not a huge wave. It's in a few individuals. I know in the work that I did at the Advocates, there were, and as O'Shane said, he helped a few friends, but it wasn't like there were a ton of people from Jamaica coming necessarily. And so, one of the things that we did sort of on an ad hoc basis was asking clients that were further along in the process if someone from their country of origin was arriving and saying, would you be open to connecting with someone who's just arrived? And I think it's oftentimes been a little more one-on-one support, especially because there is in a lot of cases, people are trying to continue to fly under the radar as they're navigating the process, and they're, standing out first as a Jamaican in the community that might make them more vulnerable in the broader waves of refugees from that particular country. So I think there's kind of been a slightly different approach to that, and has been, some of those one-on-one connections. It's really been a huge support for people.
Yes.
I'll just pick up on your point, Perry. I think it is a really good point, and it's a little bit of an uncomfortable truth, but like that we as the LGBT community, there's that more that we can be doing to support our LGBTQ refugee and asylum-seeking siblings. And I always go back to, there's an organization called the Movement Advancement Project that has done research on LGBTQ giving habits, and guess what? The most common type of organization that LGBT people give to, it's not LGBTQ organizations. It's pet and animal organizations. And we love our pets, which is great. But so there is that gap, and I think there's some room for us to grow as a community there.
And I think some of it's just because we hold so many different identities, right? And so, I mean, I will say we have a group of a sponsor group that is made up of the LGBT community who's about to sponsor their third case through the Welcome Corps. And we've had tons of sponsor groups come together who were asylum seekers or refugees themselves, now sponsoring. But I will say to that, life is still hard, right? So even though you arrived to the U.S., that doesn't mean you made it. Like, you still have to pay rent, and you still have to navigate a really, really hard process and learn English and get a job that keeps up with the crazy costs of rent. And so there's also some barriers to sponsorship that makes it hard for people. And I do think sometimes it is about the identity. Like, the refugee name tag is one that a lot of people want to be able to rip off, and so to have to, whether it's LGBT sponsorship or coming as a refugee and sponsoring, it might not be the piece or the identity that people really want to hold on to and wave the flag for.
Thank you so much for this panel. I'm really enjoying it. My name is Ann Campbell, and I'm a researcher. I actually research international students who use international education as a route to immigrate to the U.S., queer international students. And I have two kind of related questions that very much fit in the same line of identity. So I'm not sure exactly who to target this to, but I welcome your thoughts. So most of the people that I've interviewed and that are included in a book that I'm writing, what they're really highlighting is that they're not out. They're not out to diaspora. They're not out to their families. And so part of this challenge is that seeking asylum is hard to kind of see yourself as a queer asylee if you're not speaking about it, if it's not part of your identity, and if other people around you don't know. And then the second point is that also, especially from China, a lot of students are not familiar with queer culture in the United States. They're not familiar with how to advocate for their community. So finding each other across campuses is a challenge, but then also advocating. For example, when they teach English, they don't teach pronouns and why they might be using different pronouns than the heteronormative set. So I'm curious if you could speak a bit about kind of this space for people who are not out, or kind of, especially from countries where there's no legal protections.
I'll go ahead.
And then I'll go.
So I went through something similar to that. And when I told my family that I'm seeking asylum, because I was gay, I was like, oh, I'm not really gay, wink, wink. I'm just. Yeah, I went through the history of all that I've been through, and they were there to witness all of it. You know, a lot of it. They were my protector and my defender, and so they completely knew the struggles that I went through. So they really didn't want me to come back, but they didn't want me to come back because they knew how dangerous it was for me to live there. However, I couldn't say I was gay and I'm really gay. I said, because people think I'm gay, they were treating me like they did, and so because of that, I can't live there, so I'm seeking asylum in America. So that's how I got around it, by describing and reminding them of all the things that they've witnessed happen to me, and they know what the culture is and all the laws against same-sex relationship there. So it was easier for them to understand why I was doing it without like thinking too deep about like, is he really gay or is he not? If you understand. Did you understand what I just said? So that was my way of getting around it, just pointing out the struggles that I went through and that they witnessed, and why I had to go through those struggles.
I'll go back just even further in the process, and for those who are seeking to enter the refugee system, you know, there's this whole process of refugee status determination where these asylum seekers go through the process that you described, Sarah, where they have to basically prove that they're a member of the community. And if you're deeply closeted in a place, you know, it could be Honduras or Ukraine or Uganda, you may not. It's harder to like kind of prove that. You know, the burden of proof is on you that you're a member of this community, and because most people are closeted, they don't have that, so it can make it difficult to access those channels. And then you have, you know, we talked a lot, and Sarah talked about how there's a lot of state-sponsored homophobia and transphobia, and you know, particularly in Africa, there are just stories that are rife. Well, and Mexico as well, of lesbians and trans women subjected to this horrible idea of corrective rape, like when they go to authorities and report what's happening, and so they decide, you know, these people that they're trusted to protect them, that they're going to convert them. And so there are a lot of challenges around this that are unique to being an LGBTQ refugee or asylum seeker.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I think we'll cut off the questions though for now, and in between the two panels, there's definitely going to be more than enough time to be able to talk with everybody and ask more questions, just so that we keep on with our schedule here. So to close it out, hi everyone, my name is Abby Nelson. I'm the program coordinator at the Human Rights Center here at the law school. I first would like to thank Aram and the Binger Center for collaborating on this special and important and very educational event, and for the work that both do to support refugees and asylum seekers in various ways. I would also like to thank and recognize Sarah Brennis as the moderator, and our panelists, Steve and Annie, and of course, O'Shane and Juan, for sharing their experiences and perspectives. And as I kind of reflect on the panel today and what I've heard, a common theme that maybe actually really resonates as like a common mission, not only for the organizers, but I imagine for everyone in this room, which is to empower and advance the rights and protections for LGBTIQ refugees and asylum seekers. Through spaces like this, we are really able to connect with others, share our voices, and help shape our local community into being one that advances human rights for all, no matter who you are or where you come from. At the Human Rights Center, we've had a long commitment to many intersections of human rights, but especially have really committed a lot of our work to the spaces of the rights of non-citizens and the space of gender and sexuality. And as we're approaching International Human Rights Day coming up on December 10th, I think it's really important that we recognize that we are at a critical time in the world where global trends and negative rhetoric surrounding migration and LGBTIQ plus community and many other spaces is increasing, and more broadly, pushback against human rights is intensifying. But with this, I think that we're all reminded that building these connections here today can help us address the real world challenges, both here locally in Minnesota and beyond. With that being said, before handing off to Melissa to invite you to the second panel, I do want to invite everyone to the Human Rights Center's Human Rights Day lecture on December 3rd. That's happening here in room 25 during the lunch hour. It's a special presentation from Margaret Huang, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and her presentation will be on the human rights movement in the United States today. So with that being said, thank you all again for everyone being here, and I'll hand it off to Melissa to give the details for congregating outside of the room in between and on the second panel. Thanks
Okay,
again.
perfect. Hi, my name is Melissa Pierce. I am Director of Development for ORAM, and thank you everybody again for taking time to be here. This conversation was amazing, and we're going to continue it in 30 minutes with a second panel with more lived experience and experts in this field. We invite everybody to stay as you're able to be able to enjoy that conversation. In the meantime, we invite everybody to come step outside. We have some, no, not outside, still inside, it's too cold for that. But we have some light refreshments, and we hope we can continue that conversation in between. Don't feel like you have to go online and register or anything, just come back into the room if you're able to stay for the second panel. All right.
One more thing, if you did come for CLE credits and you didn't check in, please go to the front check-in table so that we have proof of your attendance here today. Thank you.
My name is Daniel Duty. I'm going to be your moderator today. I think this second panel, we're going to make it a little bit more informal. As you can tell, I like to walk when I talk, so I'm not going to be good at the microphone.
Grab that guy. You can grab the handle.
Yeah.
Guy meaning non-gender.
All right. No. All right, there you go. So the discussion, the second part of this discussion is really going to be focused more on solutions. We heard at the first panel a lot about the plight of refugees, asylum seekers, et cetera. We want to kind of bring that down into the context of, especially here in Minnesota, what could we do? What could we do differently? And so, again, we're going to hear from Ibrahim, who is a refugee from Somalia, who will share some of his story. But then we want to move into somewhat of a brainstorming session with this group to think about what could we do as Minnesotans. I don't know if you guys know this, but 15% of Minneapolis's population is made up of immigrants. So we're a large immigrant community with a lot of resources potentially available to us. We also have a ton of small businesses. We have a ton of big businesses. In fact, I don't know what we're at today, 15 or 17 of the top Fortune 500 companies are headquartered here, so we have a lot of resources from that perspective. We've got world-class academic organizations like the University of Minnesota, nonprofits like the Human Rights Center. So we are well positioned, if we take advantage of it, to be a center for LGBTQ refugees. And so we want to grab some of your ideas. We want to brainstorm with you guys. But before we do that, let's introduce the panel. So I was at home this afternoon writing the bios for all these guys, and I thought I sent it to my phone so I could just look at it, and realized I never pressed send. I don't know who the hell you guys are. But let me start right here with Alexis Cantor. So Alexis is currently the interim president and executive director of Family Equality. But I know her from half my life working with her at Target, where she was a senior executive working in many of the company's global businesses and understands a lot about where folks are coming from, especially countries that are not LGBTQ friendly. But what have I missed? What do you want to tell us?
I'm a Sagittarius. I grew up in New Jersey, so I usually like to introduce myself that I'm a queer Jew from New Jersey, and that tells you everything you need to know about how I'm about to communicate with you, which is pretty direct. I am a spouse to my awesome other half, who's of 25 years, Jackie. We are a host home for LGBTQ kids experiencing homelessness through Avenues, a group here. And we've had 9 kids, many who are still very much part of our family. So I have a 16-year-old who is non-binary. We have a 23-year-old who is trans, and a 33-year-old who is queer. And many people, many kids in between that are still part of our family. So what I'm most excited about in this conversation is you don't shed any identity when you walk into work or you seek support or you are trying to find community. You come as your full kind of awesome self. So I'm excited about this conversation.
Yeah. I don't know how you do it. I call her Saint Alexis. But
it's not true. I say I'm a jerk and I just do really good work to counteract that.
Next, we have Ibrahim, who I had the pleasure of meeting just last week, who currently works as an accountant for Alight, the parent parent organization of Orem. But you came to the U.S. as a refugee from Somalia.
Yep.
I don't know if there's anything you want to add, but I want to come back to you because I want to hear your kind of full story.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's come back to you. Steve, we met you in the last panel as the executive director of Orem. I think most of those people were here, but you want to give us a little bit more detail. Obviously, you're working around the world in a lot of transit countries, really helping that group of LGBTQ asylum seekers or refugees make it to, whether it's the United States or somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add, because I actually didn't talk a lot about Orem in the last session, but we are the oldest international nonprofit focused exclusively on the protection and empowerment of LGBT refugees and asylum seekers. We've been doing this work for over 16 years. I took over as executive director from the founding ED about 5.5 years ago. And personally, so if you heard my bio earlier, I have spent some time in the LGBT advocacy space, but prior to that, I worked in the private sector as well, and kind of had an aha moment in my early 40s, or maybe like a midlife crisis, and decided, I had a lot to be grateful for and wanted to give back to the community, and international has always been the focus of my work and my passion, so.
Well, great to have you here again and your expertise.
Thank you.
And then we have Rebecca Wagner, who is the executive director of Quorum, which is a local, maybe Twin Cities or Minnesota-based?
Minnesota.
Minnesota-based organization for LGBTQ businesses.
Correct.
And I know you also worked at Outfront Minnesota in their anti-violence program.
I used to.
Used to, yep.
Used to, yes.
But tell us more. What else should we know about you?
I'm a Pisces, the Capricorn rising.
So is my spouse.
But I have a Capricorn rising, which saves me every time. I grew up in Arkansas, so it's a different world down there. And I'm so excited to be on this panel. I'm not intimidated at all by you, by any of you. But Quorum, for those of you who don't know, Quorum is Minnesota's LGBTQ+ and allied chamber of commerce, and we work to build, connect, and strengthen LGBTQ+ and allied businesses across the state and really across the region. Everything we do falls into one of those buckets. We have about 70 networking events. We have some big signature events. We have a partnership with Deed for working with small businesses and small business grants and education. Our entire focus is to make sure that people have access to economic opportunities, right? That they can, if they want to start a business, you can start a business and you will have the education, you will have the support, and you will have the networking to make that happen. And we recently started working a lot more with North and South Dakota because they're the out west, and they're not the square states. My hand's been slapped. It's not the square states. It's you know, the greater West or whatever it is. Anyway, but there's not LGBTQ plus chambers there out in those areas. And so we're also working very closely with a lot of the other organizations that are here with a Move to Minnesota campaign. We want you to move not only move you, we want you to move your business. We want you to move your family. We want you to go to school here. We want you to use our realtors. We want you to use our financial planners. Move to Minnesota. So that's something that we're really, really working on right now. How do we get people here, especially LGBTQ plus folks and allied folks, and they're coming, so.
Sounds like a great opportunity for LGBTQ refugees
100%.
coming, looking for business opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Ibrahim, I want to return to you because I want to ground us again in the story of what it means to be a refugee. And I know you came from Somalia. Tell us what it was like living in Somalia as a gay man, and why did you leave? What was that journey like? And what are you up to today?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody who's here. Being a gay man in Somalia, it's not easy to be a gay man. And growing up, it was a beautiful, raised in Mogadishu, so it was beautiful and stable life, and everything was functioning. And growing up, I had a great family. My father was one of those fathers who, I will say, center, not left or right, but no religion obligations in the house, and he wasn't practicing a lot, so that made me a little bit easier to hide things still, but it's been really good and lived a wonderful life and had a wonderful family, but it's still the major thing was hiding and not telling everybody, and also not relating to, there's no LGBT community, and there's no basically gay man or woman. I'm just kidding, but it's just they don't like
You're
to.
the only one.
I was the only gay man in the village anyway. But so living in Mogadishu, everything was stable, like I said, but things started going down after we lost the government. And we left it home, we evacuated outside the city, we come back, and I always depended on my father, which was the person who provides everything to us. So we come back home, no infrastructures at all, no water, no electricity, nothing. So that's was starting over the life and build what we have, and I personally never thought I want to be there, because being a young gay man and living a different lifestyle, so you have to switch the code and be alert who you're dealing with, and it's just it wasn't that great, but I always have something I called a bucket list. And let me tell you, if you're LGBTQ plus, I think everybody knows that bucket list. So you keep to yourself and you have an agenda, but you can't share with people other than to yourself. So one of my dreams was to leave the country after my father and my older brother got killed. And also I got injured, but different incident for that. So my father was gone, and I was the head of the family because my father was married to 4 wives. So my mother was the youngest and the last one who he was married till he got killed. And it was fascinating and interesting and scary, but I started working and selling household product in Bacaro Market. I don't know if you guys heard, that was the where Black Hawk helicopter went down during the U.S. government troops were there. But things were fine, and I saved a little bit of money here and there, and I have older siblings also. Whatever they send us, I keep saving some and left at home and went to Egypt. And the reason I left was, I wasn't feeling safety, and also personal freedom that I was seeking, and ended up in Cairo, and it took me 4 years because as a gay man and as a Muslim, and not, you can't tell. It's hard to trust anybody whatsoever, and you cannot tell your your personal life or what you're seeking and who you are. But I had a faith, which I always do, that I will go through it. It's one of my dreams coming to America. So it took me 4 years, interview after interview after interview, because the people you deal with in the UN, it's Egyptians and the translator. We can go that later, but it's just, but I'm glad I'm here. I ended up Oregon, and yeah, it's best place to be. Sorry, Daniel. Daniel is my husband, and he's from Minnesota. You might think other way, but yeah, it's one of the place that you can be in Oregon, especially in Portland. Yeah.
Maybe you can get him to move to Oregon someday.
I don't think so. It's Midwestern thing. People don't move here.
Yeah.
Yeah. They come back. Yeah.
Daniel's good with negotiations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, as I hear your story, and I heard the stories from the folks on the other panels, like, in a weird way, it doesn't seem as hard as, like, knowing how hard it really was. Like, to lose your father, your family, to leave your lives behind.
Yes.
Go to a foreign country like Egypt, and then spend 4 years there just trying to reach your dream.
And you cannot be in Egypt. You cannot be to yourself.
Right.
Like, you mentioned like the dating app. I mean, so being a gay man and you want to have a socialized people like you, and you're in a Muslim country. Who knows? You might meet an officer who undercover. So it's like a big X. You can't go those areas. So you have to watch those things, and no one will inform you, but you learn the people who unfortunately got caught for that. So you don't want to do that again, or just go out and have a date. Yeah.
You're never really safe, no matter where you are.
Not at all.
Yeah. It's interesting that this is not part of the discussion, but just my own observation is, in America, we can so quickly complain about our circumstances. And to listen to your story and the stories of others, you realize, like, people believe America is kind of the Holy Grail. And, we should be grateful for that as well, because we're lucky enough to be from here.
I agree with you. This is absolutely, it's a wonderful country. But it has everybody has a scar in their body. So there's a couple of scars, but it's just, you have to do what you can to survive.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that and for sharing your story. Steve, I wanted to go back to you and have you talk a little bit about some of the barriers that Ibrahim faced and what you see, and what that journey actually looks like, and a lot of the barriers there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Daniel. And Ibrahim highlighted a lot of it from his own experience, and I touched on it a bit in the last panel, but to unpack it a little bit, first of all, LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers are, again, they're usually traveling alone, so they don't have a built-in community of support. They manage to, leave their country and get to usually a country that's close by, often a neighboring country. So the cultural context is not a lot different, or the legal context. I mentioned before, our biggest country program is in Kenya. We do a lot of work there. We serve hundreds of LGBT refugees there. But as I mentioned to Jeannie earlier, same-sex relations are still criminalized in Kenya. It's not a lot better than Uganda. It's kind of marginally better. And so, people arrive. I remember, Shane from the last panel mentioned that housing is like one of the first needs, just a safe place to lay your head, where you're not going to get attacked. And, some of the most severe violence we see against people that we serve is in the refugee camp in northern Kenya, where people are amongst other refugees. And so, even if you manage to find some semblance of housing, and then, the next thing is needing to be able to support yourself, because if you're in an urban setting, if you're outside of a camp, there's no support at all. Even if you're in a camp, the World Food Program has reduced rations recently. And so, you need to earn a living, and there are many barriers to that. There are often legal barriers, because it can be very difficult, in some countries impossible, to have legal work status. There can be practical barriers. You or someone else mentioned language. A lot of the refugees we work with don't speak the language of the country that they're in. And then there's just this rampant discrimination that people face on all levels. I was in Kenya in March and talking to, and especially poignant, thinking about today on International Day of Trans Day Remembrance, and she talked about going to a medical clinic to try to get some medical support, and when they realized that she was a trans woman, like the person she was talking to started calling all the staff over and said, "This is a man claiming to be a woman." It was just like, no privacy, no medical support that they can get, just complete lack of what we would expect or hope for. And then there's just the long waiting process that refugees and asylum seekers face, which can be years, can be indefinitely. We work with some people in the camp that have been there, some of them that grew up in the camp, and came out as LGBT in the camp, which is just, hard to imagine. So it's really a lot of marginalization across so many different identity lines.
I know we're focused today a lot on what we could do here in the U.S. or in Minnesota, but I'm curious why is it important in those transit countries to have folks like you in Orem?
Yeah, good question. Well, like I said, first of all, it's where most refugees and asylum seekers are, 99.5%. But also because our work is divided into 3 areas: protection, which is the safe and secure housing; empowerment, which is really focused on economic empowerment; and then advocacy. And when we were actually putting together this event, this panel was kind of part of the DNA of this panel was to focus a bit more on the business community and economic development and empowerment and solutions, which is why you've got some more folks from the business community here. And so that has been a really key piece of our work with the economic empowerment program. And the way we look at it is that we're giving people first the ability to have self-sufficiency, because ultimately people don't want handouts. People want to be able to take care of themselves. And we're also giving people skills that they can take with them wherever they go. And just as an example, we opened a digital learning center in Nairobi a couple of years ago. And so we teach folks online digital skills, skills to learn to do online freelance work, to learn things like graphic design and other skills. So this is things that they can do now from the safety and comfort of their own homes, but then they'll have skills that they can take with them as well. And it's like, listening to you, Rebecca, talk about the work that you do as the chamber. It's kind of similar in a way. It's like empowering people. We do a lot of training, skills training for folks that want to start their own businesses, skills training, business management, financial literacy, and then we make seed funding available on a competitive basis that people can apply to get their businesses started. And so it's really practical stuff, but then it's skills and tools that people can take with them wherever they go.
Yeah, we've centered a lot of the discussion on asylum seekers and refugees, but one of the things that attracted me to Orem originally was the fact that you guys are helping LGBT people in kind of transit countries start businesses there.
Yeah.
whether that's a chicken farm or an internet cafe or a taxi service or like, I was going to save this for later, but literally $600 starts a business in Africa. You think about that, there's a lot of businesses we could invest in. There's a lot of people that we could help by investing in those businesses overseas, which is, so not everybody has to come to America. We can also do things overseas.
Absolutely, and that's a perfect tee up. We have I have a video that that we brought just to show one of the folks that we have supported in a business in that refugee camp I've been talking about. This is a lesbian from South Sudan.
My name is Fardos Dawood and my pronouns is she, her. I came in Kenya the year 2011. I settled in Kakuma refugee camp for about 10 to 11 years now. I joined ORAM this year, April, where I registered and they offered a business training for 3 days. And after the training, it's where they gave us a seed fund. And with the seed fund, I decided to open a cyber shop, and not only I have a business partner with the name Masti. Yeah, Masti and I decided to open a cyber shop. So as I've said before, I have a business partner and he is my business partner.
Yeah, by the name, I'm called Steve Brown. This is our business. With our services is sending movies, photographing, painting, and this is my partner for those.
So as we've said, the services that we render to our client is, number one is we give movies to people, and we have 4 laptops. Each laptop has a different type of movie with its own languages, because as we all know here in the campus, everyone speaks English, not everyone speaks Kiswahili. Yeah, so all these laptops have their own movies with different languages. And secondly, we also have a place for charging phones. As we know, Kakuma is not a very stable place with electricity. So down here is where we charge phones. Clients might come and they want to charge their phones. Yes, we also offer that. And then we also offer Wi-Fi supply. You want to come browse on the internet, do some work online, you come here. We have a place here for Wi-Fi. It's very stable, by the way. So our business, we used to run it till night time, but since we have an issue with the solar, now we're having only one solar, which has given us a limited time of working. So we work from morning till 6 in the evening, which it's like a bit of challenge to us, but so far we hope very soon we will succumb that challenge. As I've said before, my business mostly focuses with the youth. So my vision is to set up a PS5, like I want to set up like a gaming shop inside here, which you all know that PS5, PlayStation is very marketable. Yeah, and that is my vision, because I know if we do that, not only am I helping myself, but I'm helping other people, thereby employing them also to work with me. So I would like to thank ORAM so much for the seed fund. Not only changed my life, but also my partner's life, and we hope we're going to do it to other people in the future. It's very safe for me to say that I am independent, because we know WFP has cut down the ration to 40%, which is, there's high starvation and hunger here in the refugee camp. Now I can eat anything, change my diet, which is okay for me, buy myself clothes. I'm very independent right now, and this is not because of me, this is because of the seed fund that I got from ORAM. So all I want to say to ORAM is thank you so much for the seed fund.
Very cool. It reminds me of the need we have as humans to be self-sufficient, self-reliant. And I can imagine for LGBTQ refugees especially, not only being self-reliant, but not relying on employers that might discriminate against you.
100%. And there's also, and I didn't really mention it in the earlier panel, but there's this like mental health and social benefit from this? Because, you know, refugees spend their lives in kind of a state of limbo, just waiting for a ruling on their case, waiting for something to change or happen. And so folks are so appreciative of something that they can focus their energy on, something that they can feel proud of.
Yeah.
And it
Feel
really,
that self-worth.
Yeah, exactly.
If anybody has a PlayStation 5 they'd like to get, we can send one over. But Rebecca, I'd love like kind of following up on this video. Like obviously this is about small business,
Right.
And you're about small business. So tell us, you know, you told us a little bit about Quorum, but how might we interact between what a Quorum does and what an Orem does? And we'd love to hear your ideas and thoughts.
I'm very, very excited. I love that, by the way, because that captures the spirit of entrepreneurship so well, right? Like I would never think to set up like a shop where people can charge their phones and, you know, and I don't know, the movie thing, I don't know, you know, I have so many questions. And, right? But just a couple of like sort of grounding things is that of small businesses in the United States, 18% approximately are immigrant led, and which is roughly the same amount as LGBT small businesses, so LGBTQ plus, so 18%, and that's so for immigrant founded businesses here in the United States, that's about a little over 740,000 businesses with 27 million employees, right? So we're talking about a very large group of folks with a different level once they get here and are able to get the support that they need to grow and thrive. According to Gusto, immigrants started 1 in 5 small businesses in 2023. Like that is just, these are just remarkable numbers. And so what I think that one of the opportunities I think that I can see with Quorum is how do we help support that, right? You know, we think about funding, we think about workforce development, we do a lot of those kinds of things, navigating change. We help people navigate change all the time because, and I know that you've mentioned it before, so many people start a small business either because they cannot get a job, or their place is so toxic that they can't stay there, especially if you're LGBTQ plus. And you know, and I can't imagine like the intersections of being a refugee and LGBTQ plus, and just the enormity of barriers that are there. And what that does is it also makes this whole series of populations uniquely vulnerable to systemic violence, right? To discrimination, to taking jobs that are basically trafficking, right? Like those kinds of jobs that instability leads to invisibility, right? And because if you can't come out in the country that you're from, then there's going to be that fear. There's going to be that how can I come out here, right? And it's mind-boggling. And I've done since we've met last time. I've done a lot of research, and I'm just looking at all these just like opportunities. I can't underscore the sense of urgency, right? Because people are coming here. I'm sure that the list, there's 12,000 people on some lists, right? Which is an enormous amount of people who identify as LGBTQ plus, and who either are asylum seekers or refugees. I think that sort of broad umbrella of allyship is crucial, because I don't have the lived experience, right? Like this particular kind of lived experience, but I can be an ally, right? I can be an ally to a community that's different than my own, and I think that that's where we can step up, because some of us do have $600. Some of us do. Some of us are experts in workplace support, right? And some of us are experts in building up soft skills like resumes and job seeking and helping people find those jobs. And cash is king, right? Funding the work. I don't mean to sound crass, but you know, this work has to be funded. And I think that the need is, as we look at sort of the global climate right now, for LGBTQ plus people in general, it's stark, and it's kind of not to scare you. It's a little terrifying if you haven't seen the news. But we know that it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better just yet. And so what are we doing? And it's a place like Iran that's moving the needle on that. And so it becomes a place like Quorum to help support the work you're doing, because we're not gonna get into this business, but we do have people that can.
Absolutely.
So
Well, hopefully what you're seeing, by the way, are you from New Jersey too?
no, I'm from Arkansas. But I was at a job interview
I was
once.
like, just because you said it, you just said it. Like,
Well, I was at a job interview once, and they asked me if I was from the East Coast, and I love the East Coast. So, maybe I'm just in the wrong place.
there you go. Well, as you can see, we're starting to build here based on the stories of the need, what Orem is doing to contribute, but now bringing in this kind of small U.S. business connection, especially in Minnesota. We've got such a strong Chamber of Commerce and LGBTQ community here. Now I want to go to the other direction and talk about the big bad corporations that we have here in Minnesota that Alexis has been a part of for many years, and but also has been on the very small nonprofit side. So I'm curious, like from your perspective, having been in big corporations, what's the opportunity there? What do both sides, quite frankly, small and big, don't know about each other? Like, how could they connect and work together better? I know I put a lot out there for you.
I love it. It is interesting, having worked for Target for over 20 years, which is minus a couple as big as you get in retail, and then switching gears to leading a nonprofit. And what I'm struck by every day is we don't build a better future alone, we build it together. And what is not happening today is corporate work with nonprofits. We don't speak the same language, we don't follow the same calendar. Money matters and funding matters, and being able to get into a conversation where you align your purpose, your mission, your values. There is so much unknown about each other, and I think there's massive assumptions. You try to, you go through foundations or you did this, but at the end of the day, the business dollar matters. And if I take a step back and think about my own experience, I led global teams, and even working for a company that certainly is not perfect. Target was not perfect, but they mostly tried. They didn't know things. So I led global teams, and I had team members in different countries that could not be out. They couldn't fill out our paperwork. They couldn't think about the training. There were so many limitations, and there was a perceived safety because you had the backing of something like Target. But Target went in unaware and lacking knowledge. And I imagine, right, I zoom back to that moment, and if a Target and an Orem had a relationship, the power of what that would do. And I think we think about it wrong. I think we as nonprofits go to these big, or get big companies and want their money and think that they get it. But we have to start by having very real conversations about baseline understanding. I would argue in this country, we don't know consistently what laws impact queer people, what different companies offer or don't offer, and I think we don't see it as a mutually beneficial moment, right? If we think about the talent that could go into corporations and make their organizations better, because we know more diverse companies are more profitable and more innovative. How better to do that than with LGBTQ refugees who have diverse backgrounds and lived experience and can make your strategies and your work better. But we're not having that conversation because we're asking for one thing but not talking about the benefits. And on the flip side, what big organizations like Target can do for an organization like Family Equality, Orem, Quorum, others, is put their money where their mouth is. If I have to read one more corporate mission statement that really says nothing about what they're gonna do, we have to hold them accountable. Our dollars matter, and again, it breaks it down so simply. You gotta talk the same language and be singing the same songs. You've gotta set goals together. The relationships don't happen overnight, so you have to have a plan for I didn't marry my spouse right away, we dated. And I think there has to be time to build connection and relationship across these organizations, because again, I've seen it whether I was working with kids who were in the foster care system or my own team when I was at Target trying to navigate the criminalization of their identities. With better knowledge, we do better. And that for me, it sounds so basic. And this world is a dumpster fire right now. And I think sometimes we just have to break it down into the simplest form. We are humans, we are complex, we are flawed. There is no CEO at a massive corporation, Brian Cornell at Target included, that is perfect. And we have to find and create the spaces. Like, how awesome would it have been if we had corporations here today, right? We have to create the space for dialogue, storytelling, examples of return on investment because it matters to business, and then deliver together. But
So I'm curious on that, whether Rebecca, Alexis, anybody on the panel, quite frankly, like, how do we make that happen? How do we bring corporations, small businesses, nonprofits, academics, others together in kind of a grand coalition, quite frankly, to solve some of the big challenges we face as a world? And I actually would open it up to the audience if you guys have an idea or thought.
oh, John.
Who invited you?
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, but the question that I struggle with is like where you make that connection within this behemoth company. I mean, you've got,
agree.
You know, we're used to going to the, you know, to the foundations or the, you know, the giving side. You know, they've got the ERGs and, you know, they're well-intentioned, but they don't necessarily have
the money.
You know, HR, they've got their own issues that I'm not going to go into right now. You know, but so the question that when I was listening to you going, absolutely, but then also going back into my own corporate experience saying, where do we make those connections within this large organization where they're eventually going to get to the level where the decision makers are? Because
totally,
we're not going to start at the decision makers.
Nope.
Got to build the relationships, build the momentum within the organization. I'd be open for anybody's thoughts on like where the entry points are to start those conversations.
I think it's it's interesting now given the attack on DEI and ESG. So I think we have to be smart. I think foundations have changed their approaches, so the dollars aren't coming there. ERGs are game changer, but they're being handcuffed at organizations as well, and they don't have the money. Even, again, my years at Target, that has changed, and they don't have the same impact. I think we need to use our networks. So I was in the last, I was in the room for the last one, and it's the 5 people. We got to know someone, and so it's business. And so ultimately, it was interesting when I was an exec in business. I felt like I didn't fit in because I had lots of values and purpose, and then I went to the nonprofit world, and I felt like a heartless person. And so I think I am a business person at heart, and you've got to talk business. So for me, it's using your network. It's finding that business component. Because you have to deliver a return on investment because that's what they want. And it's hard to talk about people that way, but 100%, if you are investing in a community that can bring vibrancy and profitability and innovation to your company, there is a return on that training, that mentorship, right? Your assortment becomes more inclusive because you've thought about it differently. So I think you have to, the dollars that matter are the business dollars, not the ERG dollars, not the HR dollars, not the foundation dollars, it's the business dollars. And so the same way we're the 5 people to do the wraparound support, I was in corporate. How do I work with, I know somebody at Target, I know someone at Walmart, and I know someone at Nike. How do we start having those conversations? I also think the nonprofit world, we compete for the same dollars. And we have to stop that too. If you're talking about the LGBTQ community, we have so many different organizations, and I was just on a convening call around how do we do this differently? How do we prop people up? If Family Equality is the best organization to focus on family law, then HRC amplifies our voice. If A4TE is the best organization to amplify trans equality, then we amplify them. So I think we owe it to corporations to come in coalition, because right now we're coming and we're dividing that corporate dollar.
I'll add.
Please.
Can I add just one thing?
I know it's not time for Q&A, but you said something really important about using different language, and I would just ask that everyone here, we probably have different experiences, and when using acronyms, especially if you're not from the business world, some people aren't from the business world, so if you could explain some acronyms that you use.
Did I say, so ROI, return on investment, so yes.
Oh,
ERG.
That was one of them, there were others.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a great call.
I know I can forget that when I'm in my work environment.
Totally. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, because I have a really bad habit of doing that. But I'm not going to use any acronyms. But I will give you an example of the missed opportunity that you're talking about. So when I first got to Quorum, I had one of our members, who's a nonprofit, come to me and say, hey, I know you have a relationship with Best Buy. We need 5 laptops. And I was like, okay. Okay, and they're like, no, we want you to get Best Buy to give them to us. And I was like, well, do you have a relationship with them? And they're like, no, but you do. And I'm like, I'm not going to ask for laptops on your behalf. I don't even know. No, right? And so one of the things I want to add is that what we're talking about is a marathon, not a sprint. That there has to be less of a transactional series of conversations and more of a mutual benefit series of conversations, right? And it's not going to be one size fits all. We're not going to always be able to go to the same pond or drink lake or whatever that like saying is, because one of the things that we found at Quorum is now that companies are pulling back from DEI, from ESG, we are working with them to build different relationships.
We're just going to pause there, because you just did 2 acronyms in a row.
God, what did I say?
And I did the same ones. And I only heard, so diversity, equity, inclusion.
Oh, DEI. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Oh my gosh, here we go. I'm so sorry. What was the second one?
ESG.
Oh. No, it's environment, social, and
sustainability.
Yes. Sorry. So I lied. Apparently, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
But you're right. It's in there, and
It's in there.
I think you raised such an important thing, because here we are. We all speak the same language-ish, but not really. And can you imagine the complexity then of adding what a refugee goes through or an asylum seeker? So very, point made.
Thank you. I am so sorry. It wasn't even, I was like, boom. Yeah.
Yes, I work in a corporate environment, and I have to remember when I work with people that have either never worked in that industry or are coming directly out of college or wherever they're coming from,
Right.
to be really explicit. So I appreciate it. I just know.
Thank you so much.
I want to quickly grab Ibrahim's perspective on all this. So when you were a refugee and coming into this country, were there businesses, were there corporations that you could turn to or that helped you? Or is that an area that just feels foreign?
Yes. So when I ended up Portland, there's an organization called Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, IRCO. So I personally was not speaking English at all when I moved here. And also we have a different mathematic skills here than outside. We're the only one who uses different numbers or whatever, how we measure things.
The metric system versus,
Yes.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that organization, within a week, I have to participate because the state of Oregon will not give me a benefits if I don't go there. So it was a wonderful experience. So I learned how to build a resume, which I never had a resume before. And I learned how to learn the measurements and all these things. And also I was able to get through them to go to Portland Community College And that's how I learned English, ESL. What do they have? Adult basic education. And I did also reading and writing through Portland Community College. And that also made me meet a lot of people and connecting a lot of people. One of my things is, might be, I don't know, but I always run away and not want to have a connection with my own Somalian community, because I feel like if I say who I am and what
Yep.
it wouldn't be good, and the words will go around, and it will ended up back to my mom back in Mogadishu, which is I'm not out to my family still. So I made a lot of friends, which was 99.9% were Caucasian. So I can say whatever I want to, who I am, and go from there. I made it connect Glenn York. He was he was officiator our wedding, and he is an older man, so he really taught me the culture and how to navigate, and he's the one who told me first thing, and I still do it when I apply a job and I get an interview. I have to send a thank you card. Now I do emails, so all these things I learned, like how.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. Like, there's a lot of norms for dealing with business, for
Yes.
interviewing, for what a
Yes.
resume needs to look like.
Yes.
And if there's not somebody there to help mentor you through how to just engage the business community, that can be a big barrier.
So my first job was, I got through IRCO, and I think I'm good with people. So my caseworker somehow loved me, and she always takes me with her car, and we apply, and she writes me things I need to say, the person behind the counter that I'm giving my resume, and she stays behind the door. So what I used to do is, and I told the lady, I said, I need a job, what if I can get it? I just want to get my own money and earn. I didn't even have a cell phone. So she found me a gas station in Oregon. They recently changed. You cannot pump your own gas. So didn't have the skills, no language, whatever. So that was wonderful. And I still remember my first job hourly was $6.25. And basically, the ground moved for me when the lady told me, this is your salary. I mean, hourly salary. And it's like, wow, $6.25? I can rock now. So it was wonderful. So it's just that leads me to learn the people, and it leads me to, Glenn took me to Goodwill Job Connection. And I found my first job as a night auditor, and the lady said, I have no skills whatsoever for accounting. And she said, that's fine, I can show you. And I went through training with her every night. And I worked there, and finally we become friends, and she was moving higher position to another, same under Marriott and luxury collection. And she said, do you want to come with me? And I said, yes. And I worked another 11 years with her. So that's how I built the community. Yep.
I think that's another aspect of business where business communities can help, is the power of networking is so big. Like,
yes.
Finding those connections, using that network to increase your well-being over the years is a really important part. With the current administration coming in, we know that there's going to be cuts in government programs, training programs, a lot of the things that refugees and asylum seekers rely on. So I'm curious, how can businesses or other community organizations step up to kind of take the place maybe of some of these governmental organizations? Eric?
DFL Trifecta in state government last year created 2 advisory councils, one LGBTQ. They're up and running, but I can't tell that anyone is going there and testifying about their needs. I think that's a natural crucible for us to be raising this issue and getting common strategies and agendas. The other thing they set up was called the hub, which is to better coordinate nonprofit groups and state and local government agencies. Another crucible where we should be talking about immigrants, LGBT. So I think those are two strategies where we can bring in funding, business, employment kind of issues. We also perhaps should be talking with the chambers of commerce about immigrants are a source of workforce and population, which are two challenges for Minnesota. Does anyone know whether anyone is talking to those two advisory councils about these intersectional issues? I haven't seen anything, because again, we have piss poor LGBTQ media coverage here in cities compared to Washington.
Yeah, I'm guessing, a lot of times things get set up, and so I totally failed to even introduce who I am at the beginning. I was so excited about getting you guys
Now's a good time.
going. So I also come from the corporate world. I started out in government, working in the U.S. Senate, but then joined General Mills, recruited me to Minneapolis, worked for them for 8 years, and then 13 years at Target. And I've been trying to be a bridge between this nonprofit world, government, and business. And I would tell you that most business people have no clue what may have been passed in the legislature on LGBT issues. So there's a complete lack of awareness. And I don't know if that comes from better media coverage. There's also no really strong LGBT group in Minnesota that's kind of the center to coordinate things. Maybe that's a solution.
We also don't have the sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, please.
Out leaders, out CEOs, and they exist in Minneapolis. They are not using their voice. And so,
No names to be mentioned, but we know who they are.
We'll mention names. So again, I think it's interesting. You're right, they don't know, or they do, and they're choosing to use their power differently.
Yeah.
And because within their organizations, they're still having a debate about how do you navigate LGBTQ plus issues. Is it a human rights? No, not to these organizations. It is a value, it is a lifestyle, and it is creating conflict within a lot of these major corporations to have the real conversation that is needed to keep their employees of today safe, the employees of tomorrow, which hopefully are LGBTQ refugee and asylum seekers and trans youth and everyone. And so I didn't mean to interrupt, but it makes me mad. With great power, to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yep.
And if you have achieved that level, shame on you for not using your voice to figure out what we do and how we convene. Can you imagine if an out CEO put their name behind this, how much could change and how fast it could change?
I'm an out CEO.
Yeah, there you go.
But you're doing it. You are role modeling what it needs to be, right?
I just don't have the money that Target does.
And we also know that it is not enough for out CEOs to do it because we are not big enough to do the change alone. We need the Brian Cornells, we need the Cargills, we need the General Mills, we need them all, but they follow each other. And if we've learned anything even from this last election, there was not a courageous CEO group that stood up. How do we hold them accountable to stand up now?
Right. Daniel, I can share a couple,
please,
couple examples just to hopefully show that there is a bit of hope, I think, in some of our engagements with the private sector, supporting our work, even a smaller organization like ORM. And they come from the different sectors that you were talking about, John. A foundation example, our biggest kind of corporate relationship is with Airbnb through their foundation, Airbnb.org. This is a relationship we got to develop through Alight. We got introduced to them and connected to them and eventually built our own relationship. And they're now our biggest funder. And we've been able to provide over 5,000 nights of housing, safe, secure housing and Airbnbs through this partnership. They they love us because we are helping them reach a marginalized and underserved population. And we have this great relationship. I just got an email from them today asking if they could feature us on their website. We're like, sure.
Yes.
More of that, please. We have another company that we have a good relationship with is Microsoft, and that came through an ERG contact. It would be much bigger if it came through the corporate side. We're working on that, but we've been able to do some great things. They've supported us financially. They've done fundraising through their employee giving programs. Sometimes they've doubled and tripled matches. They've invited us a number of times to participate in lunch and learns and to be speakers for them. We've brought them across the border to a shelter we work with in Tijuana to do tech trainings for queer refugees, which is really exciting. So it's give them their employees a way to engage. So there are some examples. We want to have more. One program we did a few years ago that we're looking to build on, it was with Salesforce. And so Salesforce was looking for mentorship opportunities. And because of the work that I've described that we do around skills building and entrepreneurship, there was a lot of opportunities to do virtual mentoring because, of course, their employees were often in different places where the refugees were that we work with. But we had really effective programs with that. One other great thing that we got to do a few years ago, we were invited by the Tent Partnership for Refugees, which is a really cool organization. It's an NGO founded by Hamdi Ulukaya, who's the founder of Chobani Yogurt, who's Kurdish, Turkish, so he's got a connection to refugee issues. They're focused on bringing more corporate support and engagement with refugees because for all the reasons that we know that refugees are hardworking and creative, run small businesses, all these great things. And Tent hired us to write a guide on corporate mentorship programs for LGBT refugees. And so it targets the exact same things that you were talking about, Ibrahim, that you need to learn how to create a resume, how to interview for a job. It gets back to the thing we've been talking about, networking, how to network. And it's a really cool program. Like over 30 companies have committed to mentoring at least 50 LGBT refugees, several thousand refugees. It's a great program. We've also discovered there are some challenges to it too. It's not just as easy as that because there are so many cultural differences, and there's trauma, PTSD that resettled refugees are dealing with. So, nothing's perfect, but it's a great, really step in the right direction. So I think there's room for a lot more of that. We'd love to see more of that. And I loved the conversation about how do we access those companies? What is the access point? We talked about all these different things from foundations to employee resource groups to human resources, and to pick up on even put a finer point on your networking point, I'll take that even further, and I think that we really have to work the Lavender Mafia, and that is all of our LGBTQ contacts within the business world and allies, of course. But you two are both examples and advocated in the large corporate setting, right, for LGBT issues, and finding that right person that can be an advocate and that can take it to the highest level. And I'll give one example of a company that I've worked with that supported us at ORAM and that I've worked with a lot at Out and Equal Workplace Advocates. And that's JP Morgan. And so really strong commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. Really strong employee resource group that grew to, they were really focused on engaging senior leadership, and they had people at the, direct reports to Jamie Dimon, who was part of this group. That all eventually morphed into what is now what they call the Office of LGBTQ Affairs. So they have a whole dedicated team that is focused on LGBT issues. Not many companies are big enough or committed enough to have that, but that's like the ultimate access point. And it's made of those folks that I'm talking about who are queer, staff members and really strong allies at JP Morgan. So I think finding more of those.
I had to laugh when you said Lavender Mafia because I've been accused of running the gay mafia in Minnesota.
Well, see, there you go. That's what we're talking about.
These are fantastic thoughts and ideas.